We're going to move on with a look at what's grabbing headlines in the international press with Flo. Hi there, Flo.
Okay.
And we're going to start off in the United States. We've been keeping a close eye on Baltimore to see if they're going to have a second night of unrest there. It seems like things were much, much quieter.
Things were quieter. Of course, there was a curfew that was being enforced. You can read about it in the local press. I pulled out an article from the Baltimore Sun that's taking a look at this week-long curfew that was put in place after violent rioting on Monday. So this new rule will be put into effect for at least 7 days from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. It was, however, tested last night by a small group of rioters. Interesting editorial in The Independent today that says that the central question for Baltimore authorities is not how to contain protests, but how Freddie Gray, this 25-year-old black man, came to die of spinal injuries sustained while in police custody. That's really what they need to answer.
And the spotlight's
right
really
now.
been taken off his case by the rioting, hasn't it?
Absolutely. That's what a lot of papers are saying that today, is that all the media is focusing on the rioting, but what's really important are deeper questions. And actually, if we take a look at the front page of The Independent, they ask that question. What is fueling the fire in these riots? According to The Independent, the immediate cause of the disorder is all too familiar. We have this police brutality against the black minority. Of course, it comes in the wake of other rioting, especially in the wake of events in Ferguson, Missouri. That's why if we take a look at the front page of L'Humanité, the communist paper, they're saying another racist crime. And of course, anger is going to explode on the streets of Baltimore. However, things are a little bit more complicated than simply racial issues. And if we take a look at the editorial in the Washington Post today, they actually explain the situation in Baltimore quite well, because things are particular to Baltimore, even though they're very similar to events elsewhere. You can see how it's talking about this toxic stew of violence and broken police relations. According to the Washington Post, it's not hard to fathom how rioting could break out on the streets of Baltimore. Baltimore actually, after all, is a very poor city, rampant drug crime, and then there's these broken relations between police and residents that are particularly bad in Baltimore. Now, according to that, not only are there these broken relations with police, there are also whole neighborhoods that are left to feel despair. What's lacking in Baltimore is a sense of justice, according to the Washington Post, whether that's social justice, economic justice, or otherwise. That being said, the editorial says none of this is an excuse for what it calls knucklehead rioters.
Indeed, and a much, much less sympathetic editorial in the Wall Street Journal.
That's right. The Wall Street Journal today has an editorial called Chaos in Baltimore. Very harsh words for the rioters. Very harsh words as well for city officials. They failed to meet their more basic obligation, which is protecting citizens from rampaging youths. But what's interesting is this article is focusing on the rioting. All sorts of articles are focusing on the rioting, but there have been several articles online saying, let's not focus just on what's bad on the streets of Baltimore. There have been also a lot of really positive steps of citizens stepping in to stop rioters. And there's one story in particular that's gotten a lot of attention today, and that's a woman actually who stepped in to stop her son from rioting. She recognized him even though he was wearing a mask. You can read about it here
Oh gosh, yeah, there
in
she
the
is.
Washington Post. There's actually a video. I think if we can pull up some footage of it. She's been dubbed Mother of the Year. Now here she is stopping her son from rioting, and you can see him then turning around and going home. Kind of
Mum, you're embarrassing me.
Tail between his legs, exactly. She's been identified as Toya Graham, and she told TV reporters why she intervened to stop her son. She said she was concerned about her son's safety. She said, that's my only son, and at the end of the day, I don't want him to be a Freddie Gray. And actually, her action was applauded by the Baltimore police commissioner, who said he wished more parents would do the same for their children.
Indeed. Okay, let's move on to another story that we're paying a lot of attention to today. Of course, it is now day 4 after the earthquake in Nepal. Rescue workers saying this is a really critical point if people are going to be found alive.
That's right, absolutely. It's on the front page of The Independent once again. It's talking about how the death toll has risen dramatically. 5,000 for now, could rise further. And you can see here they're talking about survivors freezing in the Himalayas. It talks about how aftershocks, landslides, etc. are really hampering rescue efforts. Lots of focus today on the aid that's pouring in from abroad, perhaps not always for altruistic reasons. You can see this article in The Independent talking about how regional powers are jockeying for status in aid efforts. The Independent says that China, India, and Pakistan in particular are competing for influence with what it calls disaster diplomacy. And it's actually an angle that's also being focused on in the Wall Street Journal today. It talks about how China is actually pushing with a diplomacy goal by sending all of this aid to Nepal.
All the same, aid is needed, and aid
is always needed.
All right, let's just stay in Asia for one final story for you. Bit of a business story. Kate Moody might be interested in this. A word on an interesting industry in South Korea, fortune tellers.
That's right. In South Korea, fortune tellers focus on your facial features. So your eyes and the shape of your nose will tell your future. But this traditional craft of facial reading is turning into a challenge because more and more South Koreans are having plastic surgery.
Oh dear.
South Korea has the world's highest ratio of people who have had cosmetic surgery. Some are actually trying to change unlucky features, though.
Oh my goodness, very interesting. We'll read about that in the Wall Street Journal. Thanks very much, Flo Villamino, with that look through the international press.